And so for us, what's important now is to have a place where we can have a conversation around not just what's happening today, but what the future holds for our industry. Because I'd actually disagree with the opening comments, if you forgive me. I actually think we're in a very serious place in terms of disruption. This industry is faced with a very significant level of disruption, not dissimilar from what we had in terms of the music industry, where we're talking about, you all remember the days of vinyl, okay, and you look at where that industry is now, and hence kind of the title for this conversation. It's our industry digitally remastered, and we might be faced with a change on a similar scale. To me, I don't think it's evolutionary. I think it's very much revolutionary. So I'd like to start with just a little bit of context on where we're at. If you look at what's going on in terms of the scale of change we're dealing with, we've got three things happening together. Your customers are changing. You've heard a reference to millennials, so they're a different type of customer. There are different business models emerging, and technology is changing very, very rapidly. Now, each of these is driving change in the other. It's very, very highly dynamic. So it's, sometimes the technology takes the lead and generates a new business model, and sometimes it's just customer demand that drives it the other way around. So it's very, very significant. Now, we're used to dealing with our customers and our business in terms of shaping strategy around, let's ask our customers what they want. And that's a fairly typical one, and it's fairly typical from an IT perspective as well. But that's probably not going to be good enough anymore. This quote from Henry Ford, he said, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Where would it be? Where would we be if we followed that path? So so it's not going to be good enough. More recently, Steve Jobs said it's not the consumer's job to know what they want. That's quite important. This was when he was launching the iPad. There was no market research that said any customer wanted an iPad. He invented it and he changed the whole world. That's quite an important concept when you think about it. So you've got to lead as well as follow. Not just lead your customers, you're also going to have to think about leading your industry before somebody else does it for you. So for me, again, just taking the context, if you look at our economic history, it's peppered with innovations. So what tends to happen around these things is there's an invention which in turn drives a market innovation. The time lag between an invention, say like a steam engine, and when it actually has a disruptive effect on your industry, when it becomes an innovation, used to be 30, 40 years. It's constantly shrinking now. So we're in a period where actually we're seeing an absolute explosion of innovation. The internet itself, World Wide Web, is about 20 years old. So nothing much happened for a couple of years, and then suddenly we had Google, we had Amazon, LinkedIn. You can take your pick, whichever one. We got the sharing of Airbnb, you've got Uber. It's just gone an absolute explosion. So what you're faced with is an industry that that is driving far faster change. The changes that we're seeing are driving far faster changes in our industry, and it is changing our customers' behavior also. Historical precedent, because it's hard for people to grasp the scale of this thing. Sometimes when you're in the middle of something, you don't really understand what it is you're dealing with. So you're in the middle of a storm, you don't know because it's just so big. But it is a historical precedent for this. 500 years ago, we had an invention, the printing press, that led to a series of innovations. The Reformation would not have survived if the printing press hadn't come along. Just wouldn't have happened. Okay. It also led to social and political upheaval at the time. It changed the Western world completely. Now, the thing I like about it is actually, in terms of what was going on then and what's happening now, given the way technology is driving change, that 500 years ago, it was about the standardization of information and being able to distribute that information cost effectively. Martin Luther was able to create little pamphlets, cheaply produced, easy to read, and he was able to get them into all the major cities. Before the printing press, he couldn't do that. Now, we've got something similar in terms of what the internet and the various industry or companies that are springing up around that. You're talking about the ability to share vast quantities of information, easily shared and easily understood. And if you look at what's happened, the Arab Spring, you could put that down to social media. So again, we have political upheaval. So it's not to be underestimated. This is a very significant change we're facing. And to take another example from history, I love this one because when you have huge change, you also get huge denial. So Oliver Wright, when they put the first flying machine in the air, it was in a field, and beside that field there was a railway track. Hundreds of people saw these guys flying their machine. Okay. Now, a full year after the first flight, and he'd been flying it, every week or whatever, the chief engineer of the U.S. Navy described what the claims that there was that you could fly as absolutely nonsense. A full year after they were doing it. And for a full 5 years, general denial in the USA, right? So For us, we got to understand that we are in a changing. The scale of the change shouldn't be underestimated, and that you shouldn't go into denial. There are things that are possible now that you wouldn't have. We just wouldn't believe. And we'll go through some of these. They're kind of wild, but it'll be interesting to see what you feel about those. You also have to generate. To my view, there has to be a strong degree of leadership. Simple things like, I don't know, electronic signatures. What the reluctance to take them on. Yet the world, in general, is moving down that direction. Is what customers want. Simple things like that. So what are we talking about? Absolutely everything in terms of the world we're living in has gone online, and increasingly it's gone direct. So you can take a pick of your numbers. There's 3.1 billion internet users. The vast majority of the world that we would be involved in terms of commerce, just about everybody is on the internet. So it's there. They're all online, and increasingly the direct. So a question for us might be, so how online is your business? And what happens to your dealer channel in 5 years' time, maybe 3 years' time? Because most of your business today presumably is still coming through that channel. And will it be like that? And what will people take? People's perception as well, it's always going to be there. Well, maybe it won't be. Okay, and maybe that change will happen a lot faster than you think. Just a hands up for anybody who's heard the term big data. Right, it's wonderfully hyped at this stage, right? However, unfortunately for all of us, it's quite real. Okay, so in terms of what we're talking about, there's been a huge explosion in the amount of data that's out there. And there's also been an equally huge explosion in the number of devices and types of devices used to generate and share that information. So, these things are in just terabytes of data. The numbers are just ridiculous, okay? And it's just getting bigger and bigger. And the Internet of Things is generating tons of data as well, and the different types of data. So, by 2020, 31 billion devices connected to the internet, not just human beings. So you're just going to see more of this stuff, okay? And our ability to process it has increased. One big driver for this is that, the cost of data storage has halved every 2 years, over the last, decade or so. And the density levels have gone up something like 50 million-fold. So what you're talking about, it's dirt cheap to hold data. I remember when I was, studying computer science at university, we had to program to actually, be careful of the amount of space we use. Well, forget that. Just buy tons of the stuff, okay? So another interesting factor here is, in 2000, 25% of the data we stored in the world was digital. By 2013, that's 98%. So now it's all digital, okay? That creates a different opportunity for us. So let me just go through this one. Now, the big data is a topic that we'll get into in a bit more detail later on, but there's three things in terms of the way to get your mind around this that are important for us in my view. First of all, you have to understand there's been an absolute power shift, okay? Our ability to process vast quantity of data is phenomenal at this stage. You can just check with Amazon and Google and these folks, and they're doing it today. So that's a big power shift. A little more subtle is the power shift that's been around the way in which we would have made predictions from data. So those of you who study statistics in university, it would have even if you wanted to create an understanding of what was going on in a population, you always had to get your sample right. The sample size was key. It had to be absolutely random. And if it wasn't random, whatever result you got was going to be rubbish, right? Now, you can forget that. Right? Because actually, the samples they've got now, people like Google, is to have everything, okay? So you don't have to worry about a small sample size because they've got all the data, right? And if you take, and a good example, it's a fairly well-known case study, the Center for Disease Control in the US was trying to predict the outbreak of flu. And they, professionals, and they've been doing it for years. And the time lag, their predictions was 2, maybe 3, 4 weeks in terms of working out what was going on. Google were able to work it out instantaneously. They just went and analyzed using big data engines what was going on in the searches in their data, because they had all of it. Because people, tend to see, if we got the flu, I'm searching for a cure or whatever. And they turned out to be far more accurate and far faster than the Center for Disease Control. Now, that's a scientific example. You start thinking about what that does to your business, and you're in a different world completely. The other thing that's changed here in terms of where your mind is you need to understand that it's moved, again, a bit from the statistical perspective. It's knowing the what, not the why. Okay, again, when I was doing stats, you do your regression analysis and all this, and then you spend the rest of the time trying to figure out, was there an actual causation? Well, the world's moved from causation to simple correlation. So they don't care. Just throw the data into a big data engine, and it'll tell you what the correlations are. If you buy beer, or you buy your tendency to buy nappies, whatever it is, right? And they don't know why, and they don't worry about figuring out why. Now, the reason this is important is I've got a ton of data now. So I can do this quite a lot. And causation is expensive. It was always quite difficult and expensive. You've got to get very smart people to spend a lot of time working out the causes. If all I'm worried about is the correlation, I can just produce it. Now, a good example of that is Amazon's item-to-item collaborative filtering algorithm. Actually, that's the thing that tells that Amazon used to say, when you go buy a book and they make its recommendation, what to purchase next comes up. And it turns out that their recommendations are particularly good. So it's a very, very effective. They have no idea why you should buy this other book once you've bought this one. They just know that you will. The last point over here is the dealing with messy data. So even though just about every piece of data we're dealing with is digital in today's world, okay? Only 5% of it is structured. Now, again, for the technicians like myself, we were reared in college on how you store data, how you structure it, how you analyze it, and so on, and that all went in a particular way. Well, actually, only 5% of the data in the world fits that. Videos don't fit that model very well. Or if I put in not available into a phone number field, that doesn't work so well on computers, right? Okay. So if you ignore the messy data, you'll miss out on 98% of what's out there. So they don't. Okay? So now they have ways of handling this, particularly people like Google. They're very, very good at it. Also, you have what they class datafication of everything. Engine noise becomes data, body position, geolocations, all sorts of stuff, the color of your eyes, whatever it is. It's all data as far as they're concerned, and they can analyze all of that, right? So the bottom line here is that more data trumps better data. It doesn't have to be accurate. So what I lose in terms of micro-analysis, I gain in terms of the big picture. It's a bit like seeing the wood for the trees. So that's what they focus on. They can put huge amounts of data through these engines, and they can get through, they can get the big picture very quickly. Now, you're not going to get away from, if my bank account it has to have whatever my balance is, that has to be right. I'm not saying that that's the case. But just in terms of making predictions, particularly around customer behavior, this kind of stuff really works really well. So to boil that down, what does it mean for us? Okay, to me, what it means is we can now know a great deal more about our customers' behavior, and you can know it in real time. Now, if you think about what that might mean, if you've ever gone on a Google search and you search for a term, and then suddenly you see all these ads that appear, and they seem to be remarkably, relevant to what you're doing, and that's what they're doing. You could also, check that with the NSA in America. I mean, that's Edward Snowden. So we have this situation. So to take some examples that may bring this to a reality from a finance sector perspective. Traditionally, I was going to use credit as just one of them. So credit scoring traditionally has been based around what would be classed as a small number of strong variables. Okay, things like your late payment and so on. There are models out there that are emerging in the new world that may well be based on a huge number of weaker variables. These will be ones that you might find on social graphs, ones that you find across the data that's spread out across the internet. There's a company in the States that kicked off a couple of years ago. They claimed using these types of models, these new models based on vast quantities of data, that they outperformed the industry by about a third. This was a subprime lender lending to subprime customers for personal finance. They used 70,000 variables, which is a huge number, and they were running multiple underwriting models simultaneously. Now, they would claim that a lot of the data was, 10% of the people listed were dead, right? And they had no full record for any given customer. So it's pretty messy, but yet they were able to hit that kind of performance. I don't know if you see the recent news. China is about to set up this social credit system. They have a pilot on the go at the moment. So Alibaba has their pilot, that's happening now. Again, they're planning by 2020 to store vast quantities of data and lots of different types of data. And then they'll start building your social credit or your credibility or trustworthiness, I think is the term they actually used, based on looking at things like a combination, no one single piece of data, but did you pay your taxi fare? Did you pay your parking fine? One was the chemical. Did you acquire your academic degree correctly? And one was even around, did you get birth control advice? Now you can see the kind of data we're talking about. These are all vastly different types of data, but when you bring them all together, you're able to get very good answers. So for us, what does that mean? It could actually transform credit decisioning. But even if it didn't, if you look at subprime markets, for example, where data is a bit sketchy, and if you look at the new type of customers dealing with the so-called millennials, there's not a lot of data out there, in terms of the traditional models. They don't have big financial track records in the traditional sense. If this stuff works, it makes our markets that would have been, before this, you wouldn't have touched, perhaps, a lot safer to deal with. And if I can outperform the industry by something like 33%, I can afford to reduce my price. and still make a hell of a lot more money, because you're going to make it in terms of the margin up front, but you're also going to have to offset whatever you make up front with would-be losses downstream. And if I'm experiencing less losses, I can become very, very competitive. So, next piece, talk about is we mentioned artificial intelligence. So what I'm just trying to do is give you a broad sweep of how these things are all interconnected. So artificial intelligence is very closely related to big data. Now, what's really important about it and what we really need to get our heads around is, not really. There's only one man in the room that I know who can make his way through this, and that's my chairman, Dr. White. For the rest of us, I suspect that might be a bit difficult. Let's talk a little bit about this, because to me, actually, it's the hottest topic in the world today. I'm a technologist at the end of the day, and for me, this is actually a dream come true to some extent, and it's a phenomenal in terms of what people are able to do. I don't know if you would have been aware, there was a summit in London called the Deep Learning Summit. Nobody would have heard of it. It had a bunch of, I don't know, maybe a couple of hundred PhD students from mostly from the UK, places like Imperial College and so on. And this thing went on for 2 days, and I sat through it, and I was just amazed. I understood like about 1% of it, to be honest, but it was just amazing to see the buzz and what it reminded me of the whole dot-com era, when the dot-com was exploding in our face. So it is a very real and powerful concept. So just a little bit in terms of what we're talking about here. So we had the concept of artificial intelligence runs into a thing called machine learning, which goes into another subsector, which is called deep learning. And that's the new bit. That's the new paradigm. And it turns out that that's working very, very well. What artificial intelligence is really about is essentially pattern recognition, whether that be videos, text, data, whatever. Really, really good at that. Now, it's not new. It's based on a technology called neural networks, which has been around since the 50s. But some of you will remember, do you remember the era of expert systems? Oh, back then, okay. Right. So I was around for the expert systems. I actually, when I was getting educated the way back when, that was one of the topics we had to get through. And that turned out to be a big failure. But that is an element of, it's a part of artificial intelligence, and they have this concept of AI winters, for which there have been 2. The technology basically tanked. Expert systems held great promise. Those of you who ever use one, yeah, okay, this is going to be great, and it wasn't. Okay. However, it's now back, and it's back in a very, very big way. We'll come back to trained versus self-trained in a second. The reason it's back is that the way artificial intelligence tends to work is you have to train your models. So you need examples and data for the algorithms to figure out what the pattern is, right? So the more data you have, the better. And guess what we have with the internet? Tons of data, right? They didn't have that back in the 80s. Now you've got loads of it, and you've got lots of different types. You've got billions of hours of YouTube videos, lots of records, all sorts. So you can run it into these machines. And what we used to get into was training models, which meant you had to have very expensive programmers or knowledge holders who would tweak the algorithms to make these things work. Well, they've now got self-training systems, and you can just throw the data in, and it starts figuring out what's going on. Now, it isn't perfect just yet, but it is extremely powerful. Okay, so what's driving it a bit is I've got much more data, which artificial intelligence models love. I've got better software. The algorithms themselves are better, and I have much cheaper processing power, particularly what the GPUs, as they're called, the ones that were used for video games. They turn out to be brilliant at parallel processing and brilliant for this stuff. Okay, so it's driving a lot more power, and what you end up with is effectively breakthrough AI, and it is breakthrough stuff. So, to put this again, that's the technology, let's put it into something real for us. Okay, there's a guy, Dr. I don't know how you pronounce it, NG, I call it Dr. Neg. He's one of the, if you ever get a chance, look him up. He's a fascinating character. He used to be in Google's Brain project, and he's moved now to one of the Chinese companies, Baidu. So he reckons, today in China, 10% of internet searches are done by voice. Reckons by 2020 that will be 50%. So voice recognition, which artificial intelligence is the key tool for, is actually quite important. Now, for you, right? So if you were investing today in, say, I don't know, let's say one of your front ends, point of sale system, right? How many of you ask your IT vendor, can we do search by voice? I've never had that question, right? Now, there's a fairly good chance that in the next 5 to 10 years, that's actually going to be more important than text searches. People aren't that good at text searches. As children, we're trained to speak of things and come up. So if I can eliminate the text piece, I've got a long way to go. And when you get to, we'll come to the whole, automotive car, connected vehicles and so on, voice commands become quite important. Now, I don't know about your children, but my son, he's constantly on his phone, and if you ask him a question, he goes, "Okay, Google," and he asks the phone a question. He hardly ever types. He just speaks to it, and it's remarkable how accurate it actually is. I don't know, you would have heard, presumably, of the IBM Watson project. Yeah, okay. So again, that's artificial intelligence, and it's, it won the game of Jeopardy, which was, in terms of how human beings think that was a particularly difficult task for that machine, and it did it. Okay, so it's not just about chess games. But in a real sense, there are and what IBM have done with this, rather than try and sell it as an item, they've actually sold it as a service. So it's more like a cloud-based offering. There are 45 financial services companies today who are using that service, and they're in, and one of the areas they're focused around is risk and compliance. The other one would be wealth management, financial advisors. So it's a very real thing. Now, when you take that and you think about the big data models, that we were talking about earlier on, and the decisioning stuff, and you apply artificial intelligence to that, you get to a situation where what used to be impossible is fairly possible today. For example, it's pattern recognition. I mean, essentially, isn't that what underwriting is about? You look at the data and see, is this customer good to pay? You've got a couple of ratios of you, but you're actually, as an underwriter, one of your experiences that we're relying on is the fact that you can spot a pattern that's not just obvious with a few variables. Well, trust me, the machines are a lot better at that than we are. Then there's the so-called deep ear, right? But what this is about is recognizing emotions, right? And you can add to that the ability to do facial recognition. So Facebook's algorithms for facial recognition have a 97% accuracy level. They're better than we are. Okay. Now, if I have a situation where I can recognize facial expression, and I can automatically figure out the emotions of the person when I raise my voice, now, like there's a distinction between what I mean, yeah. If I can do that, we might end up with a world that says, rather than having the F&I man, you might have the AI man, because they might, the system itself may well be able to give the customer better advice and certainly be a lot cheaper than what you're doing today. And in the new world, maybe your new consumer, maybe that's what they'll want, and maybe that's what they'll expect. I don't know if you would have heard, well, everybody's heard of Elon Musk, I'm sure, because we have some of his colleagues here today. He put this whole AI piece was so seriously called Summoning the Demon, because actually he felt it was an existential threat to actual human life. Stephen Hawking shared his view. So it's become a very, very serious thing, because we've got this self-training capability. And we've moved from the old world of expert systems to techniques now and technologies that work really, really well. This thing is going to take off. It will be unbelievable. So that, and to some extent, the AI is feeding this next paradigm, which is what I would class as predictive computing. Taking a fairly trivial example, everybody has a smartphone. You go to bed, you set your alarm to get up at 7. Your diary says you have an appointment at 6 o'clock in the morning, and your phone is connected to the internet, and while you're asleep, it figures out that we've got a traffic problem on your typical route to work and wakes you up 20 minutes earlier and says, you need to get up earlier, sorry, and you need to take this route to work, okay? So I had a direct experience of this. I use Google now. I got an email for a flight, confirming my flight, just an email in Gmail. I didn't put anything into my calendar. And 24 hours before it was due, it says, this thing appears in my calendar and says, your flight is here, it's happening this time, you need to do this. Right? So here, and that's a personal experience today. And so clearly they're reading the emails automatically. So again, they're using this big data approach and artificial intelligence to work it out. And that actually works. Now, it's a bit gimmicky, but the question for us would be, what does it mean for your customers today? So the kind of customers that you're dealing with, this kind of stuff, it changes their perception. So they have an increasingly sophisticated expectation of what technology will do for them. So if you put technology in front of your customers, they're used to a world that has this kind of stuff in it, not the kind of stuff we traditionally put out there. So even, leaving aside all the magic of this predictive stuff, is, why is this website asking me to key in all this stuff? Why am I being asked all this? Why isn't it just telling me what I want to know, right? And that's what people are getting to. And there is a bit of a scary piece around, is there going to be a backlash based around privacy and so on? Well, it's a fairly safe bet that everybody in here is being captured on about 20 cameras before you got into this room this morning if you drove here, okay? Or even if you didn't drive, your train station, it'll be there. So do you actually care that much about it? Well, I don't think that we do. So if you've got a predictive capability, what if you were able to predict a customer's likelihood of defaulting before they even knew about it themselves? Because again, if I have access to their pattern behavior, customers, for example, if I'm paying for stuff with my phone, I've got Apple Pay or whatever, got a lot of information. So and if I've got access to all of that big data stuff that's out there, then maybe I can tell things about what you're about to do, and maybe I can influence your behavior. And if I can't, maybe at least I'm forewarned. Then we have the wearables. We did some work actually on Google Glass some time ago, and then Google Glass got taken off the market. It is now making a comeback. So more recently, you've seen the news in the last couple of weeks, they're going to bring it back in. So they at the time when they were taking it off, they said they would, and they've been as good as their word. Smartwatches, you can just see that app that we've built there in terms of the mobile phone. So we just built that in terms of what would you do. So it's a bit gimmicky today, yeah. However, maybe it won't be gimmicky tomorrow. What would people's expectations be? And you will see different types of devices coming onto the market. Okay. How am I doing for time? Yeah, 20. Okay. So everybody's heard of the driverless car, yeah? Makes the news all the time, right? And I'm sure we'll get driverless cars in time, right? But that's not what's important today. Here and now today, we have the connected vehicle, and that is important, okay? So you have this, every vehicle that's made today, practically everyone anyway, is effectively a mobile network. They're they're coming out of the factories with all these comms built in. By 2020, 90% of all cars will have a networking capability. So, because you have to make your way through the used car market as well. So in Michigan, there was an experiment for using smart infrastructure, and the cars were talking to the traffic lights and talking to the roadside equipment, and there's an equivalent project, car in Europe. So all of this stuff is real today. Today, you have cars that can drive themselves and park themselves. That's here and now. But to me, what's important is, because the vehicle is connected, it depends, you as a finance company, your car manufacturer has this technology going into the car, and the car can speak back to the manufacturer. Well, you need to get in on that game, because you want to know what's going on in that car as well. And it's finally a great way, it's a great excuse for you to stay in contact with the customer throughout the life cycle. Typically, prior to this, if I had a vehicle for 2 or 3 years, you sell it to them, and that's the last you hear of them. And the car companies themselves haven't been great at customer retention, really. They're not great at continuous contact. The finance companies tend to be a little bit better at that. But you have a great excuse to do it now, because it opens up all sorts of things for us. For example, picking a few at random. You could have dynamic insurance products that's based on actual driver behavior. So I can price your insurance, and I can change your insurance payment every month if needs be, based on the kind of behavior you have. You could have, it's a dream come true for those who are looking at, creative products. I could be, in the fleet sector, we're quite used to, financing options on vehicles. Well, maybe I'll finance a different type of option going forward. Maybe there'll be information-based options. They don't have to be physical things, right? You could even stretch it further. When you get a connected vehicle, we're also experiencing the connected home. You're saying those things in terms of the purchases that Google had made in terms of one of the acquisitions. So you've got devices in your house that you can, and then when you leave the house, you can use your phone to switch on the lights and the heating and so on, right? But you could stretch yourself and say, look, if I'm owning the connected vehicle and I finance that as a fleet company, maybe there are other services I could offer that customer. So, taking a silly example to some extent, people sign up for people to take their alarm alerts. Well, if you've got a 24/7 service that you're offering your customer for the vehicle, maybe you plug the alarm piece into it, and for you it's going to cost you nothing to do it because you got those people managing that service already. What do they do anyway? They get an alert and they call the police. So it's taking a kind of a trivial example. But some more real ones perhaps would be around excess mileage. Have the car tell you that you're going to hit your limit before, do it in advance rather than after the event, and you don't have to worry about collecting. The telematics are going to do that for you. You could have predictive service booking. The car itself will have enough technology in it to figure out that it needs a service, it's got a problem. It could tell you that, and it could also book that service for you automatically. Or you'll have a little app for doing it, right? Nice and simple, okay? Floor plan finance, wholesale. One of the big costs in wholesale is the audit, the stock audit. You've got to get people out there, and they'll go and they do their stock checks once a month or whatever it is, and they've got to cover the geographic location. You pay a person to do it, they have to drive around and do it. Well, you don't have to do that anymore. The car will tell you whether it's left a lot or not. You're going to know. It's going to know because because of its geolocational capability, because of the network facility that's in there, it can know that for you. That would save, would save a huge amount of money. Now, it's going to create to me, it creates some risk. And this is a here and now phenomenon. This is not something you can hang around with. This isn't about waiting for the driverless car. These cars are there today. There's going to be a battle over the ownership of the customer, the ownership of the customer relationship. So who's going to own it? Because customer relationships are based on who's making the contact and who owns the data. Now, if I'm going to have a connected vehicle, who's going to own that data? And therefore, who will own the customer? Because you're going to be faced with a challenge going forward is, are you going to stay as a car company, or are you going to have to be a tech company? Because when Google and Apple get into this space, they could create some very significant challenges for you. And one of the problems you'll have is that even if you decide, you're not going to change your model, you are going to have to get across in-car apps. And you'll have to get a lot, and so the car manufacturers will have to get a lot better at developing software than they're able to do today. And it's hard to see how they'll keep pace with the likes of Google and Apple. 3D printing, that's going to change. That's already very real today. They're printing bridges with these things. What happens if we have, we have printed options? And how would you manage the RV on an option printed by a 3D printer? What would happen to your ability to do residual value assessments? So we've moved from the Industrial Revolution to the Information Revolution. So the question is, how many of our business models are actually based on the former rather than the latter? So you've seen some of these before. There's lots of organizations that disappeared. If you take a look at this list, it's not that we stopped reading books. Borders was a $100 million business. It's disappeared because of Amazon. Nokia, Kodak. We didn't stop taking photographs. We take more than we ever did, but they're gone. BlackBerry, a $4.2 billion company, gone. And all that really happened is that the user experience changed around what the customer's expectations, how they should be dealt with. And just to take an example, for one of the recent surveys, 42% of customers are quite happy to buy cars directly, and presumably they'd be quite happy to buy finance directly as well. We mentioned the millennials that will come up later on. So, so not just the business model is changing, not just the technology, but the customer themselves. Millennials, so-called internet generation, they want to work with you online. They're tech savvy, and they are very aggressive in terms of customer service. By 2025, 75% of your customers will be millennials. So this is the new generation, and they have this technical expectation. They like they buy based on word of mouth, and 73% of that's coming from social media. So for us, technology is becoming the lens through which customers will experience you and your service. And then you get to the question, and I'm going to finish up here, in terms of what kind of technologies are we talking about? And from a White Clarke perspective, we're looking at some key drivers in terms of what's driving our strategy. So first of all, this concept of agility. We have to have agile businesses. If you want an agile business, you have to have agile business processes. And since every process is buried in the technology, you have to have agile technology. We can't predict the future. There's a huge amount of change happening today, and it's going to go on, so you have to be able to respond. Okay? On the far right, in terms of the second driver, intuitive technology. If you're dealing with the millennials, if you've got all of this online stuff happening, then what you've got is there's an online expectation. So you're going to have to think about making everything available through a self-serve platform. And what customers expect in that world is an easy and intuitive experience. Classic, like Churchill's famous quote, sorry I wrote you a long letter, I didn't have time to write you a short one. Think about that. It's actually really, really difficult to make stuff easy and intuitive. But everybody here has bought something on Amazon or on the internet, and not one of you received a training course with how to use the website that you went through. Not one of you. But when's the last time you rolled out a system, say, to your dealer network where you didn't include any training? And if you go self-serve, you cannot train. You can't train the planet. Mobile reality, so everything's gone to mobile. That just makes this easy and intuitive experience twice as hard. It's actually more difficult to do it on those platforms, but you have to cater for a range of diverse devices, and you have to be able to create a unique yet consistent experience across devices. And that includes the in-car applications that you're going to see. And you're going to have to, I believe, get into this whole in-car act in terms of the finance services sector as well. Social media, to some extent, I would see social media becoming a new customer service channel. And if you actually look at, something like in a recent survey, 42% of customers, that's how they want to interact in terms of customer service. There was a time when you didn't have call centers, and then everybody had to have them. Now I believe you have to integrate with social media. Then we covered the big data and AI piece, when it is an enormous opportunity to analyze and predict your customer behavior. And the problem here is traditional IT doesn't work. You need data scientists, a different type of IT to the traditional one. And I would say that you need to think about building a corporate capability, but you need to build it with your car company, not by yourselves. Last, the cloud. I mean, it's so overhyped, but the key thing I would say is that the apps that go into the cars, into these connected vehicles, are more than likely going to be deployed in the cloud. So you need to understand what's going on there. Plus, if I take a cloud service, which I can get on tap and I can just swipe my credit card and get servers off of, server space off the likes of Amazon or Google, and I add business process outsourcing to that, I can stand up a business fairly quickly. So you may well see competitors coming from places you weren't expecting before. So that's a broad sweep. To touch on it, to bring it down to earth a little bit more, everybody knows that we've got, the drag on all of this wonderful new age of technology is security and regulation, okay? Now, I'm not that worried about security because the security problem will get solved. TalkTalk was mentioned earlier on, and there's been lots of breaches and so on. It's going to get solved because it has to. What's the alternative? It's a bit like, we switch all the computers off, not going to happen. It's a bit like solving the environmental crisis by taking all the cars off the road. Not a good answer, okay? So it will get fixed. The good news is, and again, I'll have to defer to my chairman from his days of quantum engineering, so you may or may not have heard of the concept of quantum mechanics and quantum, which has now led to a thing called quantum computing. Now, in very simple layman's terms, they have this thing called quantum key distribution, and it's already in live trials and it works. So it's going to get better, and it is virtually unbreakable. Not virtually, actually. Based on today's science, there's no way of breaking it, because Ed will tell you over a coffee break the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. If I actually measure something in the quantum world, I change its state. So you're absolutely guaranteed you're going to know whether somebody's eavesdropping on your stuff. Right? So it will get a lot better. And that will just drive, and if and when that comes, then that will drive the industry quite significantly. Kind of a summary for me in terms of just technology overall would be, we've moved from the age of system of record to systems of engagement. If you actually think of it in those terms, that what it's about now in terms of technology is engaging with your customers and your business partners, less about the actual record keeping that you would be used to from the good old days, because the record keeping is going to happen anyway. Okay, I'm probably over time, so I need to get off here. Thank you very much for your time. Okay, thank you.